have heard a lot about faith and fear. This morning I had a thought that what makes us afraid is our past, and what makes us have faith is the possibility of a different future, different from the past. Because whenever we are afraid of the future, we are only afraid of the past. That the mistakes of the past may not be repeated, that the disasters of the past may not be repeated, that the darkness of the past may not be repeated, ad infinitum. More sound upstairs.
No, you have to have 3 fingers.
3 fingers. I used to be used to some other 3 fingers in the past. Anyway, that was a joke. You see, so what I was saying, fear of the future is nothing but the fear of the past projected on the future. Now, in a sense, when we have no past, then there can be no fear. But unfortunately, it is not possible because we have a past. Everyone has a past. In fact, if we think over it, we have enormous pasts. Not just this past of yesterday or last year or 20 years ago, but past going into the past, deeper and deeper into the past, to the very beginnings of times. Know how to get rid of that fear of that past, which means fear of ourselves. Because after all, my past is a past which I created for myself. I did what I did. I did not do what I should have done. 2 things, you see. What the accountants put at the bottom of a balance sheet or a bill, E and OE, errors of commission and omission. 2 mistakes we make. What we should do, we don't do. What we should not do, we have done. Therefore, fear is composed of both action and inaction. The results, we are always talking of the fruits of action when we talk of karma in Hindu philosophy. But even more disastrous can be the fruits of inaction. What should have been done at an appropriate time? The heartbroken situation of a wife who could not save a child, perhaps because she had no money to buy medicines, or the telephone was cut, or the doctor was away. The disaster caused by either inability to act or unwillingness to act. The anguish of a mother who suffers an abortion, says, I don't want this child, and then regrets it all her life. Anguishes over it. The anguish of a man who could have helped a man who has fallen on the street to rise, but regrets it later. I could have done such a small thing to help such a human being, which I did not do. I was too concerned with myself. I was too selfish. I was too much in a hurry to catch a bus or a train. So I left a suffering human being to suffer. Today I suffer for it. So when we see people suffering and we cannot attempt to mitigate that, I don't say we can always mitigate it. It is not in our power to do it. But the attempt we have to make, that is our duty. When we make the attempt, failure and success are not of any more consequence. I have done what I could. That is enough. So you see, this idea of the past having such a terrible hold on our future that it makes us impotent, or it makes us keep going in circles. Let me do that which I am accustomed to do. It is safe, it is secure. It is a fallacy. Because if I am going to continue to do the very same things that I have done, in the understanding that it is safe. There is no safety in repetition. So you see, we have to forget the past, and in Sahaj Marg, we don't have to forget it, but we can remove it altogether by cleaning. It is one of the great benefits. I think it is a revolutionary concept in spiritualities. I have often said that cleaning, in my mind, is more important than transmission. Because if we transmit without cleaning, we are only perpetuating the same condition in a stronger and stronger form. In a sense, that is what modern medicine is doing. Pretending to cure a disease while making that disease more formidable, more potent, more powerful. Coming out with even more strong medicines, making the disease more powerful, until we shall one day be faced with a disease which we cannot at all conquer. There will be no medicine for it. So we are creating monsters which we cannot destroy from the seeds of the monsters which could have been easily burnt away. We are allowing seeds to grow, you see. Seeds of disease, seeds of corruption, seeds of fear, seeds of lack of love. It is amazing how many people complain to me about their lack of love, problems of daughter and mother, father and son, brother and brother, all the possible human complexities are today evident in certain societies. And it is amazing how people can have problems with their children, and more how the children can have problems with their parents. Because a child trusts. A child automatically trusts its parents. I have not seen any children distrusting their parents. Then why is this feeling that my daughter does not love me, she hates me, and the daughter confirms it. She says, yes, I hate my mother. I hate her so much that I could kill her if I could. People say these things to me and they shock me. People write this to me and I am even more shocked. Because you see, instead of seeing our parents in the future as our guides, as our friends, as our philosophers, as somebody who are leading us into the future, they have become the past to us. Why? Because they have done things which have hardened them as images and nothing more. They have ceased to exist for the child. These parents are dead to the children. They have gone against the basic human concepts of what a parent should be to the child. The parent has to be afraid. The child has to be afraid. It becomes insecure. And those who should love and cherish it have become ogres of selfishness, wallowing in their own so-called wealth and richness and satisfaction and happiness and pleasure, and the child is abandoned. So you see, parents must remain in the future of the child, must not slip back into the past of the child. What Otto said of a teacher is very much true of a parent, of an elder brother, of a guide. We have always to be ahead, not behind. Think of a mountain guide who is walking at the end of a line of people who are roped together to climb up a precipice covered with ice. He has to be up, right in front. Then the people following him who have roped themselves to him will have some confidence. He says, no, I will tie myself last. You all climb first. What can such a guide do? So you see, being in front means exposed. Exposed to what? Exposed to everything. Exposed to the good, exposed to the bad, such as we see it, exposed to danger. That is why when a child feels danger, it goes behind its parents. It hides. But the father or the mother must be present in front, not hide behind the child. You say, no, Sherry, you come in front, I will stand behind you. I am behind you all the time. You see? A child is not fooled by these things. So are we willing to be a sort of shield for the child whom we have raised, to protect it against dangers, real and fancied, which means are we willing to take upon ourselves any possible danger that may affect my child? If not, such a person does not deserve to be a parent. It is a pity that in human society, you see, we don't use the same care in breeding that we do with our animals and birds. I think there should be a law on breeding of human beings. Are these people fit to be parents? Are they bedding just for pleasure or to be parents? I think it's a shame, you see, that the care we give to our cows and dogs and chicken, we don't give to ourselves. Therefore, we raise monsters. So you see, we have this ancient idea in the East of fitness for a marriage. Physically, everybody is fit. I mean, animals mate, birds mate. What's so wonderful about humans mating? So what is this fitness of which we are talking about? It is a moral fitness. Am I willing to undertake all the rigors of training? When I have a child, it means I have to be its father, my wife has to be its mother. Are we prepared to sacrifice? Are we prepared to suffer? Are we prepared to stand in front of it and protect it from everything? Are we, in short, prepared to be a shield for it? Ever in front of it, ever advancing ahead. Nobody holds a shield at the back, the shield is always held in front. If you are that, you are prepared or you are fit to be a parent. Otherwise, it is better not to have children. Not to indulge in parenthood. And much worse to be a teacher. You see a teacher who says, no, you all go in front, I am coming. No, you are a swimming teacher, you should jump into the water first. No, I am a master swimmer, you see. I don't have to get into the water to prove it. You jump. Yes, but teacher, suppose something goes wrong. No, I am here on the shore to jump in and protect you. What would you think of such a teacher of swimming? So you see, there is a heavy responsibility cast upon every human being, male and female, and the family is the first step in that direction. One who cannot be a good father or a good mother cannot be a good abhyasi, leave alone a good teacher or a good master. That is why in Sahaj Marg, the family life is so important. This is not a place for dropouts, for people who have run away from society, people who have abandoned their wives and come in search of spirituality, or wives who have abandoned their husbands, or both who have abandoned their children. This is not a place for them. This is a place for those warriors of the soul who say, yes, I have raised a family. Have you suffered? Not that I know. Not that I am aware of. Yes, but people tell me you have suffered. I was not suffering. For my child, how can I suffer? What I give for my child is not a sacrifice. It is myself. How can I give myself and suffer for it? Can you suffer when you give your love for something? When you take up a bird with a broken wing and take it home and kiss it and feed it its milk, are you suffering? Is that milk a sacrifice? Is it a duty or a pleasure? So you see, until we have evolved to the level where a sacrifice is no sacrifice, where giving is no more giving, but a pleasure, we are not fit to be anything. So it is the duty of every one of us to take ourselves in our own hands and examine ourselves. Am I what I claim to be? Am I a father? Am I a mother? Is this child mine? Is it wanted or is it unwanted? Today there are too many children which are unwanted. And they feel it. They feel it from the time they are conceived, you see. I have often advised prospective mothers who are bearing the child in their womb to speak to the child with love. Speak to it as if it is already there. It is there. Welcome it. Love it. But on the contrary, we have only hatred, attempts at abortion. And that child grows up knowing it is unwanted, it is disgraceful, it is hated. What do you expect of a future society in which such children are born? Will there be peace in your future? Not if there is no peace in your present. Will there be love in the future? Not if there is no love in the present. If you hate something which you have created knowingly or unknowingly, how is that which you are creating going to love you? How is it going to protect you, nurture you, nourish you? It is going to hate you, disregard you, throw you away. So you see, unless we can create in the present all that we wish in the future, there is no future. Therefore, the message of spirituality is quite clear, here and now. There is no future in spirituality. The future is here. Yes, but do you talk of thousands of years of evolution? That is the evolution of the biologists, not spirituality. If Babuji had the guts to say, turn your face from here to here, and he is already there, it must be instantaneous. It must be already here. We cannot have something which is not already here. I cannot breathe the air that is going to be created 1,000 years hence by some chemist. I cannot drink the water that will be created 200 years later when there is no water today. I won't be alive to do it. The fact that I am alive here today is proof of the fact that the possibilities exist with me now, today, here. Life, as Otto said, is possibility. Life is not complete. Life is a process. It is a process in which we make the possible actual. And what is this possibility? That which surrounds us. What is it that surrounds us? Plenitude, beauty, harmony, love. Everything is there around us. Why are we so fascinated with this rather ridiculous place, Vrasand? Somebody, I was asking somebody yesterday a hypothetical question. If an Indian saw this place, he would say, but why did you pay 4.7 million kron for this? Oh, we have 18 hectares of land. Yes, but it could have been cheaper. But we have these beautiful buildings. Yes, but they are very old, tumbled down. Not enough space. We have a beautiful meditation hall. Yes, it still stinks of horses. I won't be able to answer him why we paid 4.7 million for this place. Because a man who looks materialistically at this place, well, how is this land of 18 hectares different from the thousands of hectares which are surrounding us? He would say, quite correctly in his own logic, climb up on top of this tower and see the thousands of hectares which you don't own, which are more beautiful than this small piece of 18 hectares that you do own. Isn't it? It is logical. It is a logic of a different sort. So what explanation have we to give? If somebody should seriously ask you, why on earth did you buy this ashram? I can only say, we bought it for a possibility. What is the possibility? Like a woman goes out and buys vegetables. Why are you buying vegetables? A possibility. What is the possibility? That I may be able to cook something nice out of it. What is that for? That my husband and children may eat it. It's all a possibility. It's all in the future, but it is in the present too. If I did not have those vegetables in my bag now, there is no possibility of a lunch. So you see, all possibilities exist right here, right now. And as Ude emphasized again and again, without faith, the possibility remains a mere possibility. It is never actualized. What is it that prevents our grasping possibilities with our hands and making them ours, making them actual in our own existence? First is the fear of the past. Yes, but Chariji, when I was young, my father told me everything is possible. Of course it was possible. Yes, but I failed. That too was possible. You took over one possibility when the other possibility was possible also. No, why did you fail? Yeah, child, I went about with the teenagers. Good. What is wrong with the teenagers? Yeah, but we got involved in, all that teenagers get involved with. Why? It was possible. So you grasped a possibility which was not good against a possibility which you did not accept. I have been telling our teenagers here that I am going to stop smoking in that teenager's room. Because it's wrong for us to permit smoking when we know it is wrong to smoke, when there is the potency of cancer behind it, death behind it, destruction behind it, and your heartbreak behind it. I don't want you fathers here, after 5 years, coming to me and saying, my child has cancer of the lungs. And then you expect me to pray for it. It's not possible, you see. I believe that when somebody has done something deliberately, knowingly, and is bearing the consequences of that, I don't know whether I should say it, but I believe I should not pray under such circumstances. It is then left to God's mercy. So you see, we have to look even upon prayer. No, he is all right, you see. Like this AIDS research, which I cannot understand the amount of sympathy for AIDS sufferers. How are they different from sufferers with tuberculosis or broken legs or broken hearts? Because it is much more rampant than AIDS is yet. Why this peculiar fantasy and fallacy and fascination for AIDS? That the Pope speaks about it, that the President of the US speaks about it. Why? What is wonderful about it? I don't know, really, you see. In my Eastern mind, I cannot understand. Are we funding so that future AIDS victims may not die? Does it not mean that we are sympathizing with the AIDS victims? Does it not mean that let more people get AIDS so that we may cure it? Of course, it means we don't sympathize with beggars on the streets. We don't sympathize with war-ravaged victims, except for political purposes. Whole nations which are dying of hunger, there's no sympathy for them. But for people who have knowingly, wantonly done mistakes and wrong, committed physical and moral sins and are suffering, for them, even the Pope wants to speak about it. It is unnatural, it is ugly. There is today an obsession with filth, moral filth, degenerate filth. And this has to go, you see, in a clean life, in a clean world, there should be curing, but not obsession. We should provide ability to cure them, see. Send them to the churches. Let the Pope bless them. But if you take a stance that there is unlimited money available for it, unlimited research potential being poured into it, the youth, they think, no, it's okay. By the time I get it, it'll all be okay, There'll be a cure for it. We are supporting and encouraging the activity that leads to AIDS. And this is not moral. Of course, I can see many people will ask me later, but Chari, this is not spiritual what you are saying. If you want to create a new society, you have to make corrections in life, prevent that which should not be happening, support that which should happen once and for all. Not create the ability to do the same thing again and again with impunity. And in the, shall we say, confidence that I will not get this disease because technology has made it possible for me to sin without having disease. That is not the way science should take. That is not the way research should take. That is not the way medicine should take. Natural calamities, yes. Deliberately self-sought, self-created, no. So you see, we must teach our children, don't worry about AIDS research. For heaven's sake, you don't get it. Why? Because how can we depend on the research of tomorrow or the money of tomorrow? And why should we get a sickness so that it can be cured later? It is another fallacy. It is another disease to say I can fall sick because I will be recovering soon. I have beautiful hospitals. My society supports. We have health insurance. So we can fall sick again and again, remain idle at home, because we have a wonderful government, which protects us. A government which protects you not from yourself, but from sickness is no protection, is no good government. It must teach you. The government must teach you to say, citizens of the state, this is forbidden, this must not be done. It is in your good not to do it. I remember when we were in that Frozelab, you see. One Abhyasi couple disappeared. They did not turn up for about 26 hours. I was confused. I felt responsible. I spoke to our organizers and they said, no, Chari. I said, should we report to the police they're missing? Oh, but the police will laugh. I said, why? They said, it is common for a man and a woman to be missing, sometimes even for weeks. It is their business where they are, what they are doing. Now imagine this society, you see, where a couple can be missing, not for days, not for hours, but for weeks. And none of us have the need or the urge to even telephone the police and say they are missing, because they may be in a camp, because they may be at some seaside resort. And what is the responsibility of that couple to us, who leave ostensibly for a few hours and don't come back till the next evening from a spiritual camp? So you see, we have become too hardened, too coarse, too thick in our skins. We have lost sensitivity. Therefore, we are able to feel proud that in our country, AIDS research accounts for 18% of our revenue, when another country which is spiritual would be ashamed of accepting such a fact. Shame has become pride. Things of which should be ashamed have become things of which we can be proud. Lack of schools has become pride. More and more hospitals has become pride. But we don't know how to eradicate disease, how to eradicate sickness, how to eradicate ignorance, how to eradicate the lack of a moral feeling for life. No, all this is opportunity. It is not only teaching history and geography that is scholarly, you see. It is to teach life itself, how to live. How to live a life of freedom from care. How to live without even having to think whether this I should do or not. How to live without having to think over so many things. What should I do now? What should I do next? There is only one way. Surrender. Because he teaches you what to do. Do it. There is no talk in Sahaj Marg, in our 10 maxims, of what we should not do. This has been often emphasized in my talks, that unlike all other religious injunctions, here it is only what we should do that is emphasized, not what we should not do, because telling a child what it should not do only focuses his attention on that and it wants to try it at once. The very injunction, don't do this, makes a child want to do it at once. It wants to know why. So you see, teaching begins with positive instruction. This you shall do. Meditate at such and such a time. Yes, but Chari, difficult to get up. Lost opportunity. Yeah, but I can meditate tomorrow. It is in the future. I may not be alive tomorrow. And how do you know you'll be awake tomorrow at that time? One who cannot be awake today at that time has less possibility of being awake tomorrow at that time, and even less day after tomorrow. So as we delay, possibilities decrease. They just don't cease to exist. They go on decreasing until a day comes when it is impossible. Impossible means possibility nil. A man who will not wake up for meditation today has less chance of waking up tomorrow at the same time, has even less day after tomorrow. After a week, he will say, "Theek hai, I managed for a week without meditation. What's so wonderful about meditation? Nothing has happened to me. I am still the same old guy. Look at me. See, nothing wrong. He has been meditating, like crazy. What has he got that I haven't got?" So you see, we become hardened to making possibilities impossible. Laziness, lack of acceptance of that thing which has to be done, makes us progressively hardened to the possibility of possibilities existing in our life, until we become so hard, so crazy, that nothing is possible for us. So to keep possibilities alive, I must use possibilities. To keep time available to me, I must use the time now. If I don't use it now, the next moment may not be there. It is too facile to talk of the eternality of time, clocks ticking away. What happens to the time of a man who is dead? What happens to the time of a person in a coma? What happens to the time of a person who climbs mountains, breaks his leg and is in bed for 6 months? They have time to do nothing. We must have time to do something. The difference is that. See, utilization of time means to use it to do something for myself in a positive, spiritual, growth-oriented fashion. Lying down and sleeping is not such an activity. I mean, there is a natural sleep cycle, yes, but not when you choose, not idle. We have to work when we must work, play while we must play. But again, lost opportunity because we didn't work when we should work. Now our play is stopped and we have to work when we should be playing. No result in either fields. The work is a waste, the play has gone, the child is absent. Another lost opportunity. So each opportunity, each moment is an opportunity which we must grasp. And what does that moment have? It has everything. A moment does not have this or this or this. There is no moment for sleep and no moment for awakening and no moment for pleasure. I put into that moment what I take out of it. Every moment is, shall we say, pregnant with absolutely universal possibility, eternal possibility. If I take it at that moment, I don't need the next moment anymore. Who needs time? Who has not used time profitably. He needs more and more time. Give me 3 more days. Every man who is dying, it is said, prays, Lord, give me a few more hours or few more days in which I can change the past so that I can change my future. It is too late. Because when we have left the past unchanged for long, it is like sediment in a river which becomes harder and harder and becomes rock. Now you have to blast it. Therefore, the daily cleaning. Clean it while it is still possible for you to clean. If you cannot clean it today, tomorrow it will be harder. Day after tomorrow it will be even more hard. Why? Because now there are 3 days of grossness. The lowest very hard, little less hard, soft. You will only be able to clean the top. The bottom keeps on hardening. So what is worth doing must be done now. What is not worth doing should be never done. It is not that we do what is good now and postpone the bad for the later. Say, let us meditate now and go to the pub at 11 o'clock instead of going to the pub in the morning and meditating in the evening. So you see, utilization of time means utilization of the present. There is no future for the man who has no present. If the present is gone, the future is gone. Only the past exists. And that past is inexorably going to draw us backwards. So how to overcome the past? By keeping on going into the future, moment by moment, inexorably treading on and on, unconscious of everything, save the need to keep moving. Yes, but I don't know which direction. He will show you. What should I do on the way? He will show you. To whom should I speak? He will show you. But what is this he business, How can I depend? Faith. So it is necessary for us to select one whom we shall follow carefully. Babuji Maharaj repeated it again and again. Having chosen your Guru, tie yourself to him with bonds of steel so that neither you nor he can break it again. Without faith, there can be no spiritual relationship between two people. There cannot be even a relationship of love. There cannot be even a relationship in bed. Such relationships are casual couplings of animals. No faith whether this man will return to the same bed in the evening. Then what are you doing in his bed now? Every woman should ask herself this question. See. That is why in India, in the Hindu philosophy, in the Bhagavad Gita, the responsibility for keeping a society moral is laid upon the woman. A man is a casual sower of seeds. He takes his pleasure where he can find it. It is the woman who must deny. Be moral. Close the doors. Where in a society the woman is open to every form of attack, that society has lost its moral bearings long ago. How to resuscitate it, how to restitute that sort of society again? By becoming moral now. It is not too late. It is never too late. See. But that should not mean, let me start day after tomorrow. I have an engagement with a boy this evening and another with another boy tomorrow evening. After that, basta. Day after tomorrow, not like that. Because if you don't begin now, tomorrow may never come for you. So you see the philosophy of here and now, the potency of the here and now, the possibilities absolutely infinite of the here and now are something marvelous. What is this long future we are talking about, which is stupid to my mind, when in this moment of time I can have everything that I need and want? When in this moment I can be divinized? When in this moment all possibilities are there, pregnant in my presence as present things for me? Which child wants a toy in the future? He says, Mama, I want it today. Which man working wants a promotion 10 years hence or a raise in his salary 10 years hence? He says, I want it now. So why should spirituality be abandoned to a future of which we are uncertain, of a future in which the possibility may not exist, of a future in which the doors may have closed, and of a future which I may not live to see? So these are questions which you should ask, each one of you, to yourselves. Take your future and bring it into the present, and ashram is precisely for that purpose. These are not monasteries. I was telling somebody yesterday and day before yesterday, these are not monasteries, you see, where people bearing burdens of guilt and shame come to wipe it off. This is not a toilet. An ashram is a place pregnant with possibilities for one who is able to walk into it with head erect. Whatever I am, see, I am here. But there is one thing that is essential. You must be willing to say, whatever I have to become, please make me that. Thank you.